would say. So anyways, let's get into this Cornel West video. He was interviewed by Amy Goodman of Democracy Now!, who sounds more and more like MSNBC every single day, which breaks my heart, but it's just what it is. But she at least had Cornel West on, so she could give him a tougher interview than she's given any corporate Democrats in the last 10 years. If you can't tell, I'm a little annoyed with Democracy Now! At the moment. When I was first getting into politics, they always had Aaron Mate on. They were good. They were, raging against the war machine. But now they're just getting pretty liberal in a lot of their positions and who they choose to push back on. But this interview with Cornel is a good representation of that. But obviously, it's not even close to the kind of coverage that Cornel West is going to get from the corporate media. But still, I figured it'd be great to react to this with the whole crew here. So,
talk about why you've decided to run for president of the United States.
First, Sister Amy, I want to salute you. You are an exemplar of longevity, of integrity, and consistency. And we go back many, many decades. So I just want to always.
I don't know about all that.
Already disagree.
No, you put a smile on Brother George and Sister Dorothy's face, your precious parents. But no, my announcement of running for president of the United States to be head of the empire, to help dismantle it in such a way that poor and working people would be at the very center, at the very core of our vision of what a good society actually is. It has to do, as you can imagine, with these very bleak times, these very desperate times. So it's a kind of act of desperation. I'm 70 years old. I've been at this for 55 years, and I have a calling that flows out of the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. and Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel and Edward Said and Chief Joseph and Dorothy Day and Grace Lee Boggs and Louisa Marino. All of those are the best of America. And I think we're at such a low point that America needs to be reintroduced to its best. And its best has always been the movements for justice, the struggles.
That's my favorite part of what he's saying so far as a part of his campaign is recapturing all these American heroes, all these American socialist civil rights leaders, the better part of America, the part that's always struggled against empire, which is what we're always talking about, which is what we're trying to do with our Journal of American Socialist Studies, which is what we try and do when we have Dr. Anthony Montero on, is recapture the good part of America. And that's what Cornel West is doing with his campaign. And as we've said a billion times, even if he doesn't win, even if he doesn't get close to winning, the fact that he's going to be reintroducing so many Americans with these heroes of the past, and getting more Americans in touch with our socialist roots and our the history of class struggle in this country, that's a huge step forward. And that's a huge step towards elevating the political consciousness of American workers, because that history has been erased and that history has been hidden for us. And it's a travesty.
And he just touched on something absolutely essential. It's that we're revolutionaries, right? We're Marxist Leninists. When we go into the bourgeois electoral arena, it isn't necessarily to win. It isn't to pretend that we can, be reformists and just do the right policies within the bourgeois apparatus. It is instead to develop the imminent contradictions of the system itself towards negation of the negation, right? Towards revolution. And that is what this represents. That's why Eddie mentioned this raises consciousness. That's why Eddie mentioned the return of the American people to all of our heroes that have been hidden from us, right? People know the name Martin Luther King Jr. because he made enough of a wave that he will never be forgotten. But when they can make us forget, they do. There's a reason we don't know the names Henry Winston and Bill Foster, right? There's a reason we don't know the names Big Bill Haywood and Harry Bridges. And I mean, the list is endless, but that is why we enter that arena. Not to say we are absolutely one, like not to be subsumed by this or that force, but to be an active part of disclosing the contradictions of capitalism.
That's wonderfully said. And that's, I think, connected to what we've been reflecting on about what the Bernie movement did. for I think a little bit over a year now, which it raised consciousness. Now after the Bernie movement, the younger generations of voters, they say that they see socialism more than half of them see socialism favorably, and more than half of them see capitalism unfavorably. That means that the younger generations of people consider themselves either socialists or would prefer socialism. Obviously, it's a Bernieite form of socialism. It's not, our form of socialism, but it's a hell of a lot better than where we were before. But in the same way that Bernie moved us forward and had certain limitations, those limitations had not only a negative character, but a positive one. Because a lot of the people came away from that saying, well, maybe this socialistic platform is not going to work within the party duopoly. We thought we can change the Democratic Party, take this Justice Democrat approach, but that's not going to work. I think we need a third party movement. That's what births the People's Party. And now I think even if Cornel wins, which we should fight for him to win, but even if he loses, in both cases, what we're going to find is if he wins, it's not going to be as easy to get the things he wants to get done. If he loses, it's probably going to be clear why it was that the whole power of the dictatorship of capital came on him. And the limitations, the same moment of enlightenment that occurred for many Americans when Bernie lost, and they saw the limits of being with the Democratic Party and fighting for a political revolution within the Democratic Party, they'll see it within the third party, and they'll realize it's not just about one party or another one, or the corporate duopoly, both fascistic and imperialist parties. It's about the fact that we exist within a dictatorship of capital that has to be radically overturned, and that if we want to actually pass these progressive things that most of us seem to agree on, what we actually need is a dictatorship of the working class. We need institutions and a state and a political economy that is governed by, for, and government by, for, and of the working class. And that's really the essence of the matter. So I think that it's a win-win with Cornel West. Even if we lose, we're going to win tremendously, because it's going to radicalize a hell of a lot of people and help them realize that winning the presidency with a third party in itself would not be enough. We need something more radical to undergo. And I think we're going to be able to build the communities and the bases for moving forward, even if the campaign is lost.
I just want to say one more quick thing. So what happens if he loses? If the establishment pulls some shenanigans like they did against Bernie, they could do all kinds of stuff, right? What happens if he loses and we say no? And we say, no, we're not going to take a loss. We're going to keep fighting, and you can't stop us.
Sabby Sabs asked him that, and she did a superb interview with him.
Yeah, she did.
And she asked, one of the disappointments that we had was that Bernie made us think we were in a political revolution. He lost, and then he just gave everything to Biden. What are you going to do in the case that you lose? And he basically admitted, no, I agree with you. I'm not going to just endorse Biden. I'm going to keep this movement going even after. If we lose, after we lose, we're going to keep it going. So hopefully that's true. I think Cornel's a man, regardless of the disagreements that we have, I think he's a man of integrity, of a very deep integrity, and honest person. And if he says that regardless of the outcome of the election, he's going to keep this train going, I believe him. And I think we should be there and hopefully, helping with the conduction of the train and helping to guide the train.
Is that what a conductor does? Conduction?
I don't even think conduction is a word. I'm stretching myself.
You just made it, though. I like it.
I'm a philosopher, so I get this little card in the mail when you get the degree. You get to start being able to make up words.
For freedom, the solidarity based on a fundamental commitment to the dignity of those Sly Stone calls everyday people. And there's no doubt in my mind that the two-party system now is a major impediment for the empowerment of poor and working people. I'm thoroughly convinced that, of course, the neo-fascist Republican Party has already made it very clear that they're tied to big business and big military, big tech, and so forth. And the milquetoast neoliberal Democratic Party strikes me as being incapable of taking seriously the fundamental needs of poor and working people, not just here, but around the world. The militarism abroad.
Can you pause it real quick?
$7 billion frozen for Afghan.
I think this is where we disagree with Dr. West. He sees the Democrats as inherently not part of the threat of fascism, and only the Republicans that way. When we see them both in that manner, and more specifically, the relation between them being where the danger lies. Now, I just really want to point out that doesn't matter, right? In the sort of actual concrete world, how we view them is really immaterial to what we are doing to fight them and build an actual workers' movement. How the things arrange themselves in West Head is not of primary importance to us.
And his criticism, like his analysis of the racism and the fascist elements on the right are good. He says that a lot of these Trump supporters, especially the ones with more bigoted tendencies, view the professional managerial class as the winners of neoliberalism, as the winners of globalization and the modern economy. And then they associate the professional managerial class with diversity and with wokeism. So then they just turn all their hatred towards that and all their hatred towards the culture war. That's a really good analysis. So whether he calls the more bigoted elements of the right in this country neo-fascist, or whether he calls Trumpers neo-fascists or not, I think is less important. And like Noah said, it's more about what bases of power are we building up to fight the Democrats and the Republicans, who we view as both, basically fascistic parties. But this doesn't have as much to do with what Noah said. I just thought this was interesting. Dipshits like Sam Cedar say losses are more detrimental to the leftist cause, like M4A. Not only is that stupid because it's historically untrue, like Salvador Allende in Chile lost 2 elections. The U.S. was heavily involved in helping to rig 2 elections against him. So that was 8 years, before he actually won election. In 1992 in Venezuela, Hugo Chavez attempted to seize power of the government. Didn't work. He was imprisoned. 8 years later, he's elected president of the country. Bernie Sanders in America, he didn't win, but the popularity of socialism and policies like Medicare for All shot through the roof during his campaign. So historically, this is a nonsensical thing for Cedar to say, and I'm not surprised he said it because he's a milquetoast neoliberal who pretends to be alternative media or progressive media when he's just as good as MSNBC. But I mean, this is just a stupid perspective to have on life, dude. In life, you have to fail. You have to fail if you want to succeed. You learn from failure. This is something that Lenin wrote a lot with the Bolsheviks. They learn from their mistakes. And in wrestling, there's nobody who ever goes undefeated in wrestling, ever, because you need to lose to learn, right? So to think that we should only support candidates who have 100% chance to win because a loss might hurt the left is just not understanding reality. That's the most neoliberal shit I've ever heard, and it doesn't surprise me from Sam Cedar, someone I don't even understand. He's just as PMC as you could possibly get.
It's the antithesis of a dialectical outlook, and we had a whole segment on this when we talked about Giannis Antetokounmpo. But victory contains within itself, not externally, but within its own self, defeat. You cannot have victory if you're scared of defeat. If you're scared of defeat, not only will you not lose because you never participate, but you'll also never win, right? And that's important to remember. And I hate to bring it always back to philosophy, but for me, all of the mistakes that we see people participate in their practical engagements and judgment passings are rooted in, flaws of outlook. If they had a dialectical materialist outlook, they would see that, these failures, they're not a whole separate divorced thing from victory. They're a moment in the process towards acquiring a higher form of victory. I wanted to bring up also a Cobra comment. It says, West is not a communist, and if you think he is, that's on you. He's a compromise to break the two-party illusion. We don't need him to win at all. We need him to open the door so we can enter. That's in part true. It'd be nice if he can win, and I don't discount the possibility of him doing so, and we should fight as if he can, because honestly, insofar as we fight as if he can't, will ensure that he can't, right? If we consider it impossible, we act as if it's impossible and we'll make it impossible. But I do think that, we don't have a magic 8 ball for what an American Revolution could look like. So I'm not going to close myself off to the possibility that out of this campaign, we can end up reflecting on it later on as the embryonic moment of a more thorough, radical, and comprehensive revolutionary movement.
Agreed.
In Afghanistan and what's been AFRICOM in Africa and what's been going on in the Middle East. Thank God that you keep track of the precious Palestinian brothers and sisters and all the hell that they're catching. You have it every day, and I thank God that you do. Why? Because Palestinian peoples deserve to have a visibility in terms of their suffering and ways in which they can attempt to get out from under. Same would be true, of course, for our Jewish brothers and sisters in Russia or in a France where they
He just brought up Russia. Thank you, Battle Cossack, for the super chat. Really, 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 really appreciate your financial support. They want to balkanize Russia just like Yugoslavia. Yeah, actually, earlier we showed a CIA-produced map of the decolonized Russia, which was just Russia all balkanized. So exactly what you were talking about, and exactly what they did to Yugoslavia. By supporting different separatist groups and ethno-nationalist groups like the Kosovo Liberation Army. Terrorist groups, really. So
their rights are being violated. We're wrestling with organized greed. We're wrestling with institutionalized hatred. We saw that with our precious gay brothers and lesbian sisters and queer siblings in the earlier report. But it's also a matter of routinized indifference. There's an indifference to the plight of the vulnerable. More and more, it's becoming not just a fad and a fashion, it's becoming a normalized way of life. And that is what leads toward wholesale fascism, not just here, but in other parts of the world. And we've seen it, of course, in Hungary. You see it, saw it in Brazil. We can go on and on in this regard. So for me, it's really a matter of trying to be consistent with what I've been about for the last 55 years.
Cornel, you talk about militarism. I want to ask you about invasion of.
One of the comments that passed by was really, really good. I'm trying to find it here. They say any step forward is still a step forward. And that's brilliant. And a lot of the sort of groups on the left who are prone to the purity fetish and cancel culture and all that have been trying to make us give up on West and what this could mean for our progressive forces before the campaign even begins, right? But here's the thing. And what this sort of reminded me of was a quote from Marx, who said that one real step forward is worth a dozen party programs. And when we think about what that means, it means we could sit around in tiny little circles working out all kinds of great plans. But if it's not happening in the real world, it means there's something wrong with those plans because the people ain't listening. And you know who they're listening to right now? Dr. West. And we got to take advantage of that.
I started a lecture this morning that I had for the Institute for Critical Studies of Society with that quote, actually. So it's funny you bring it up. But yeah, it shows who's who, right? Where people's actual commitments are. It's a good litmus test because if you're crossing off this phenomenon, which should get you more excited than anything we've seen in the last at least 5 years, if you're crossing it off before it even has a chance to take off, that says something about your actual commitments. And I have this section in the purity fetish, which I often don't talk about, but it's the identitarian character of the Western left. And if their identities are tied to being a fringe countercultural group of communists within capitalism, that means that if they actually win socialism, they lose who they are. They lose their identity as a fringe countercultural communist person within an insular communist group. And so they're actually scared of winning. They're scared of winning because winning means losing who it is that they are, losing in terms of their identity. That's very much prophilic and tied to these symbols and these seemingly radical discourses online.
That's so interesting because when I first started making content for Midwestern Marx and the Institute and the TikToks and stuff, like, I just thought of it as we got to recruit as many working class people as possible. We got to convince working class people that Marxism is correct and get them into a socialist communist party. And all of a sudden, I started getting all this pushback and all this criticism about, why are you bringing these people into our spaces? Why are you recruiting this person and that person and bringing them into our spaces? It was all about bringing them into our spaces, and this needs to be a safe space, and quit, recruiting these people who used to vote for Trump. And it just confused me. I'm like, wait, is the goal not to recruit workers? But for them, for these professional managerial class leftists, especially for ones who are making money being leftist communist TikTok creators who are literally just liberals who want to kill anyone who doesn't agree with their identity politics. They think that's what being radical is, doing violence against people who don't agree with their culture war positions. A lot of them just are worried about their social group, about their space, their online space getting messed up, having people who they don't like come into it. And that's not what socialism is. That's not what communism is. But it's exactly what Carlos says. They're scared of winning because it messes up their countercultural position within neoliberal capitalist society.
Here comes the catchphrase. Precisely, brother. That's absolutely how it is. They've crafted these little safe spaces for their little niche, and they only want to let people in who will make them feel safe. It's about them, not the people, not the working masses. And we say this all the time. They run shit like a goddamn HR meeting. Any working class person I tried to bring into their safe space would immediately leave it. And they would, if they have the sort of dedication that, I do or whatever, they would be trying their best, as they've done with me through all these lie campaigns and smear campaigns. They try their best to make them leave it, right? And most people aren't as stubborn and hard-headed and obstinate as I am, right? Most people will be like, well, these soft-ass libs aren't going to want me around anyway. Why do I want to do anything with them?
Not just soft, but like vicious online.
Yeah.
They might be soft in real life, but they'll say some of the most horrendous things online, and they've convinced themselves that they have, moral superiority to you because they're a leftist and you're a bigot because that's what they've dubbed you. And I just want to say this. We should get back to the video, but this is why, just so you know, this is why Midwestern Marx is popular. Despite all the times that these libs have tried to cancel us on Twitter, they try and do it again and again and again. And our core audience just does not give a shit because they're drawn to Midwestern Marx. And a lot of those are people who have seen what's wrong with the system, who've seen what's wrong with imperialism and militarism, and they want to help. And they realize most of the left is just this vicious, defeatist, self-eating, vicious, non-safe space. So they're drawn to Midwestern Marx, who is open. Yes, come join us. We'll teach you. We'll help you learn. We're focused on recruiting more people to our movement and overthrowing the ruling class. Simple as that. People are drawn to that. People want that.
Underneath all of that, what it is Western chauvinism and their class chauvinism, right? And when they sit around in their little college rich white liberal circle asking each other, in Cleveland, where I'm from, which is a majority black city, why there aren't more black people involved, it's precisely that. And then you can see, look at our class, right? Our first basics of Marxism class for Marxism school is the most diverse thing you could possibly conceive of. There's men and women from all over the world there. There's black people, white people, brown people, Asian people, etc., all getting along because we set that shit aside and do what needs done for liberation for each of us, which is bigger than each of us. So it includes all of us.
I can't believe you're tokenizing your basics of Marxism class. Just kidding. No, it's true. It's awesome. know his class is the most diverse group of working class people. It's great.
Ukraine. In March of last year, you told the New Yorker, we must try to stop the war, recognizing that the American empire has little or no moral authority when it comes to violation of international law and the overthrow of national sovereignty, as in Latin America, the Middle East, and Asia. You've also called Putin, you've been severely critical of President Putin for the invasion. Talk about your views on what happened, what is happening.
So Cornel West brings up militarism, and the first thing she does is try and get him to shit on Russia. Like, come on, dude. Russia doesn't have 800 military bases around the world, Amy Goodman. They're not the main imperialist power. Pull your head out of your corporate-funded ass.
Well, you notice this is a spot where we disagree with him on the character of Russia, but what is the actual concrete implication of what he actually said in his policy? It is pushing for peace, which by default must include denazification of Ukraine and Russia's safety and sovereignty. And so
let's listen to his answer here before we comment on it.
Needs to end.
Well, one, I think you have the clash of two empires. The Russian Empire is a deeply wounded empire. It's had its territory cut back. Of course, its economy is shrinking. And then you've got the American Empire, which is the most powerful empire in the history of the world. In fact, it was the 68th empire out of the 70, going back to the beginning of the human species. And so on the one hand, you have the promise of the American Empire to the elites in the Russian Empire: we will not move an inch. And within decades, 14 of the satellite countries of the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union, are part of NATO. They're just missiles right on the borders and boundaries of the Russian Empire. Now, we know empires behave like empires. I mean, if there's missiles in Canada and Mexico, the U.S. government would blow them to smithereens quick. We saw it in Cuba in 1962. So that empires behave like empires. They're greedy. They're driven by predatory capitalist dispositions. They're obsessed with hierarchy.
Can we pause that real quick? Because, I mean, to say that having your largest enemy, extend up until your border and militarize the country next to you, and create this whole and to say that the reaction has been one of an empire, or like this is archetypical of empires, it's just not true. It's just archetypical of anyone who's getting harassed in the similar fashion. Even if you reduce it from this macro level and you look at it from a micro level, you don't have to be like a bully, the equivalent of an empire. You don't have to be a bully so that if someone's coming up to you and it looks like they're about to punch you, you strike first and you defend yourself, or you strike and you defend yourself and you get ready to fight. That doesn't make you a bully. That makes you someone who's watching the trajectory of what's about to happen to you, and you don't want to get your ass beat. And, so, I mean, these are the disagreements that we're going to have with him. And hopefully if we can play any part in his campaign, we can maybe try to change his mind on it. But either way, anti-intervention, which is, baseline good. But these are the same comments that are given about Russia and then later about China that, Trotskyite groups that have some of the worst foreign policy in the U.S. give. But it's still, it's better than what we have.
Right. The fact that he's even willing to admit that Ukraine was militarized by the U.S. and that NATO was expanding towards Russia's border already puts him leagues ahead of every other candidate, except for maybe RFK. So, yeah.
What hits me as him being leagues better as well is that the concrete implications, like I was just saying, of what he's saying his policy is peace, which can only include the safety and sovereignty of Russia, right? Whether he thinks it's an empire or not isn't material to him. And, I'll tell you what, give him a day or two and a few conversations with the three of us, I guarantee you we can change his mind.
Right. And I'm a little more sympathetic to not what Cornel West is saying here, that Russia was acting imperialistically by launching the special military operation. But I'll say on TikTok all the time, I don't care if you don't support the Russian intervention. look at this, 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 and this. Because when you're speaking to people who aren't politically educated, they just have this vicious idea of Russia as this comic book villain, this super villain. So sometimes it's good to lead with, okay, don't support the war. Don't support the special military operation. Sure, that makes perfect sense. War is bad. I'm against the war happening in general too. But that's what I'm trying to say. Look at what NATO did. Look at this coup. Look at the NGOs. Look at the NED. So sometimes you can start from that position, and move them to the anti-imperialist position, which maybe isn't what Cornel West is doing here. But when you're appealing to the masses of America, I understand meeting them where they're at a little bit on this issue. I would never concede the stuff that Cornel West has said here, or I would never, call Russia an imperialist power, that call the special military operation explicitly imperialist. But I do kind of see where he's coming from with that.
But he's also called Putin a gangster. And he doesn't use that lightly. He's called Trump a gangster, and he considers Trump to be a neo-fascist. So, Marius is not wrong here. I don't know. Demonization of Putin is a major component of what's been legitimizing war drive against Russia, and we all know that's true. We've been talking about it for a long time, and you can't neatly separate the two. So these are some objective contradictions that we're going to have to tarry with. Hopefully, he can overcome it, and if not, hopefully the anti-interventionist spirit of it is not affected by the fact that he's demonizing Russia, which, as we know, has been a central component of the interventionist approach of the mainstream political parties.
True. And he isn't, like, a lot of times I'll say that to make the point that Putin isn't a madman. I'll say, okay, don't support the intervention, but what should Putin have done? How could you say this was irrational, like he just did it out of the blue? Whereas Cornel West is throwing some shade, just calling Putin a gangster, which does feed itself to Western propaganda. I think maybe we should touch on this before we jump back into. Go ahead, Carlos. Then we'll.
Insofar as and he doesn't speak about the Maidan coup, which I think is fundamental. But insofar as you can talk about eastward expansion, the role of NATO, etc., what you're literally doing is giving reasons. So you can't go on the basis of giving reasons and then say that the person that's reacting to those reasons is irrational, right? There's a contradiction there because he is himself premising the argument on the basis of whatever action Putin does has its reasons. You can't call him irrational after that.